I'm going to be talking about the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, which contains for all types of appraisal services, including real estate, personal property, business, and mass appraisal. That is updated every 2 years. And the Appraisal Standards Board of the Appraisal Foundation adopted and issued the 2021 edition of USPAP on April 5th, 2019, that became effective January 1st of this year. Now, the summary of changes includes revisions to reporting options and comments and standard rules, revision to scope of work rule, revisions to competency rule, revisions to definitions, and other edits included revisions to advisory opinions, including retirement of certain advisory opinions to improve the clarity and enforceability of USPAP. Now, let me mention further that USPAP allows oral appraisal reports, purchase price negotiations, appraisal reviews, and calculation engagements. Now, for calculation engagements, this
Carl,
is a, yes?
Carl?
Yes.
Would you mind pulling back just a little bit from the microphone? Your audio is pretty clear, but I think the closer you get, it might be getting choppy.
Okay.
Just pull away just a little bit and see if that.
Okay, can you hear me better now?
Yeah, let's try.
Am I okay?
Thanks, Carl.
Okay. Let me mention that for calculation engagements, this is as long as the appraiser is responsible for making sure that the scope of work performed is appropriate in such a calculation engagement. It cannot be so limited that the appraisal results would not be credible in the contents of the intended use. Finally, I'm not sure that business appraisers are aware that while NACFA and the AICPA allow contingent fees, if disclosed in the business valuation report, contingent fees are not allowed under USPAP. However, the CPA and the member and or the NACFA member must still always be objective in performing the valuation. Next slide, which should be the changes with regard to reporting. The change in USPAP retained the appraisal report and the restricted appraisal report options. However, the board adopted revisions to permit additional intended users besides the client for restricted appraisal reports, as long as the other intended users are named in the report, not merely identified by type. However, one of the things that I think is important to just note at this point is that the first draft of the 2021 edition to USPAP, which was issued in May 22nd, 2018, and at that time, they recognized that there are many forms and formats in which opinions of value can be communicated. Consequently, the appraisal standard boards, rather than limiting reports to a one-size-fits-all or the current two-sides-fits-all options, proposed a model that provided a set of minimum reporting rules with unlimited reporting options based on communications between the client and the appraiser, but required that the appraiser to clearly state any applicable restrictions or limitations in the report. Effectively, what they did is they eliminated the restricted appraisal report. Now, that wasn't adopted. That was later eliminated in the 2021 USPAP. However, what's interesting is that on February 13th of this year, the Appraisal Standards Board just issued its first draft of the 22-23 edition of USPAP, which includes a set of minimum reporting requirements. I mean, we haven't even gone. We're in the third month now of the new standard, and they're already issuing the first draft of the 22-23 edition. And here they're basically sort of going back to this one minimum reporting requirement, where they're proposing a number of significant revisions designed to rely upon the appraiser's scope of work rule decisions about the level of communications as appropriate for the intended use and the users of the appraisal report. Now, you need to go to the next slide, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to sort of follow along with the paper that I have. Now, this should be the comments and standards rule. That's what the title is. Greg, are you with me so far?
It is.
Okay, good. The board voted to delete some comments that had redundant requirements clearly stated elsewhere and to incorporate other comments directly into the standards rule. Some comments were retained to provide interpretation or establish the contents and conditions for the application of the standards rule. The board also adopted labels for each standards rule in order to make it easier for users to locate the specific rule content in USPAP. Next slide should be scope of work rule. They added language to the disclosure obligation section of the scope of work rule to address the flexibility afforded to the appraiser in the disclosure of scope of work, basically to clarify the nature, form, and format of disclosure. In other words, the information disclosed, rather than the amount of information disclosed, must be appropriate for the intended use of the assignment results. Next slide, with regard to competency rule. This was interesting, that the change that they made here, because they added some language that I'm going to read in a second, but they moved that this wording was included in the reporting standards, and they moved it to the competency rule. And they basically said that perfection is impossible to attain, and competency does not require perfection. However, an appraiser must not render appraisal services in a careless or negligent manner. This standard rule requires an appraiser to use due diligence and due care. What did this move do? It effectively now makes this wording applicable not only to the reporting standards, but also to the development standards. Next slide, which deals with definitions. They removed certain comments from existing definitions, and they added new definitions such as assignment, elements, effective date, misleading, personal inspection, physical characteristics, and relevant characteristics to help clarify how each term is used in USPAP. Next slide. There were some other edits that improved clarity and consistency. Language using the terms accept an assignment was revised to agree to perform an assignment, since accepting an assignment was equivalent to performing evaluation service. Further, on standards 9 and 10 use the terms intangible assets, while the standard rules sections, other standard rules sections, that is, refer to intangible items. Well, the SAB changed all intangible items in the other standards rule section to intangible assets. Next slide, which should be the revisions of advisory opinions. Let me go through these changes that were made. Basically, sales history edits provide additional detail and illustrations related to an appraiser's obligation to analyze the listing, contract, and sales history of subject property. Inspection of subject property clarifies that the use of drones or other technology is not personally inspecting the property. This is an interesting one, and when they talk about personal inspection of property, that does not mean that that drones will do it. That's not to say that drones may be very helpful in inspecting the property. There was an update of a prior appraisal is not the firm's but personal signature and certification, and clarifies an appraiser's obligations regarding confidentiality when performing an update of an appraisal using the incorporate by reference option. The scope of work decision, performance, and disclosure edits included personal and real property changes. Assignments involving more than one appraiser includes only minor edits. Ad valorem property text, appraisal and mass appraisal assignments includes the addition of example 5 under mass appraisal assignments. Identification and disclosure of a client, intended use, and intended users clarifies the proper identification and appraisal and restricted appraisal reports. Probably the most important revision, especially for us, is the new advisory opinion 38. This new advisory opinion compares the reporting requirements under the revised appraisal report and restricted appraisal report options, and replaces the prior guidance offered in advisory opinions 11 and 12. The next slide. There were retirement of certain advisory opinions in this new edition. Basically, advisory opinion number 4 was retired because it's a very narrow application on foreclosure sales. And as I stated previously in my previous slide, that advisory opinion 11 and 12 were retired and replaced by advisory opinion number 38. The last slide that I have on resources includes here links to the Appraisal Foundation, as well as to the summary and detailed changes to the 2021 edition of USPAP.